peeps, let's do this. Okay, here we go. Hey, everybody, it's Clay McLeod Chapman here, your WNFU Eye in the Sky traffic reporter on the hour, every hour, reporting to you live and in the sky with your WNUFI in the Sky traffic report on this wintry, snowy February evening. Traffic conditions are looking pretty congested on I-278 this evening as winter conditions continue to worsen. Visibility is pretty minimal as what is that? Are, are you seeing what I'm seeing? What the hell is that thing? It looks like looks like a cross between a Tasmanian devil and a blizzard. That is not an abominable. Oh my God! It's coming straight at us. Pull up! Pull up! Ah! It's Fearmongers, folks, and I am your host, Clay McLeod Chapman, and tonight we have a very lovely wintry panel on horror with none other than author of Our Winter Monster, Dennis Mahoney. Youth Juice, E.K. Sathue, and at dark, I become loathsome. Oh man, Eric LaRocca. I totally pooped that one. Eric, do people like actually like say your titles to you in like different voices or in like
That was a
different
first,
ways?
but I'm all about it now. Like I want everyone to just come up to me and say the titles to me of my books.
Oh my God, nobody does that?
No, they just ask me like where I come up with my titles.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna do a thing. I have the internet right here, and I just want to make sure that I do this correctly because I think uh hold on. I wanna why am no hold on. I'm trying to do two things at once, so forgive me. I'm already like destroying this podcast that we're doing. Thank you everybody for tuning in. But like nobody says like 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 even like pillow talk with like Ollie. No one will be like things have gotten worse since we last spoke. Or no one's like Eric, you've lost a lot of blood.
Oh my God. No, they haven't, Clay.
No.
They really haven't.
So you won't be in like conversation with someone and they're like, hey, what you'll be at a restaurant or something, and like you'll be ordering and like someone like, what are you gonna have? And they'll be like, everything the darkness eats. You'll be
Maybe
taking a walk.
I should order like that from now on. Yeah. I don't know if I want to hear that like during pillow talk though, to be honest.
You'll be like taking a leisurely stroll, and they'll be like, the trees grew because I bled here. Nobody's ever done that.
No, you're the first.
Wow.
You're definitely the
Okay.
first.
I think anyone who's listening to this, I think the charge is kind of put out. The gauntlet has been dropped that like the next time you see Eric in some public setting, you have to just try it. Just try it once. Like, Eric, hi, how you doing? At dark I become loathsome. Just
Just
take a
harass me with my titles.
just take a voice or something. Yeah, right. Okay. I
I'm here
I'm
for it. I'm here for it.
I feel like it would be very supportive. Um, so the reason why the four of us are here tonight is because we just took part in something that was really kind of magical, and I feel like for those who were able to kind of see us on the road, it was really amazing. But I feel like I kind of wanted to like encapsulate it and kind of document this wonderful kind of event. And unfortunately, the booksellers and bookstores themselves can't be here to kind of tell the story of it. So I figured maybe we would start off tonight by kind of telling the story of what we just did. And Dennis, I'm going to put you on the spot up front, if that's okay. Can you kind of lead us off in terms of like how like what did we just do?
Yeah, so the four of us were put together, I guess, through our publishers, sort of, but it came out of a number of booksellers. Where was that? It was at
It was
a
at
library.
NEBA, like a New
Okay.
England Bookseller Conference.
Okay. So it was Ryan and Bill, right? I think that hatched this idea of like, let's try to get a number of authors together. Three of us have books that are came out in the same month, and Aaron has a paperback coming out 2 months.
Yeah, it's coming out
Yeah,
April 29th.
right. So, and we're both on the same publisher, so it was easier logistically. Like they were able to hit two of us, and we both lived in the zone. So they were trying to get Northeastern authors, horror authors, together to talk and kind of build a bit of a traveling horror circus for the weird little carnival coming into the town and seeing which carnival fans came out, and a lot did in what has got to be the worst February in easy 5 years. I really don't remember one being this relentless with its awful weather. But so we bopped around. Where'd we start?
Yeah.
My head is a scrambled egg. We
EK,
started in Massachusetts.
can you map it out? Like, can you take us through the
I think
stores?
so. Yeah, so we started in Massachusetts at
Right.
An Unlikely Story. By the end of it, I really was like, I don't know what state I'm in. And then we did have one date get snowed out, and that was supposed to be Vermont. But then we met
Northshire
up
books.
Northshire Books. But then we
Yeah.
met up again in Portland, Maine. I live in Maine, so that was like kind of my stomping grounds at Print. And then our last stop was Gibson's in New Hampshire.
Concord, New Hampshire.
And now we're here.
And now we're here. Now we're taking the show on the digital road. Um, EK, like, did you feel as if? I mean, I guess like I'm kind of curious. Like you've had the book. Youth Juice came out last year, and you did events for it. Like you were on the road and during the summer too, right? Like it was a lot
Yes.
warmer. Um, did you know? What is the value of kind of like jamming a bunch of horror authors on one stage together for a night?
Yeah, I feel like these were so special. So my all my events that I had done previously were mostly like me just in conversation with like one other author, which was really great, but it was like mostly them kind of supporting me. So it was like really generous authors who had like really enjoyed my book asking me questions. But it was, I think it was, first of all, really special for me since I'm newer to the book release sort of world. So this was really my first time doing anything like this. So it was great for me to just be in community with so many cool authors who I've looked up to for a really long time. And then also meeting readers who had like a chance to read my book was kind of wild. Since all my other events were really right around the release, so most people had not read it. But I also think that it's just like it gave us an opportunity to really go deep on the genre and kind of like talk about our work from all these different angles. And I think it can be hard sometimes to drum up interest for like one author coming to a bookstore who you've never heard of before. But I feel like this was, we had the benefit of a whole mix of us from, kind of tackling different areas of horror. And then also the benefit of it being sort of themed around the genre. So where we covered our books, but also we talked about like, what does horror mean for us? What does it mean for the world? Why is it important in this moment and in every moment? So yeah, I felt really lucky to be part of it.
Yeah. Um, Eric, I guess I'm curious, like if you feel as if you've been on the road before and kind of taken your books on tour. Uh, you know, the notion of kind of like, uh, and I mean, like you had a few kind of single stops for your new novel as well, but like is this like is this going to be the future? Like have we kind of like stumbled upon something where it's like it used to be one author and then it was like authors in conversations with other authors. Like now is there just going to be like a kind of Lollapalooza of authors or like a Woodstock of authors to like what I guess a better question is like what is the value of bringing everybody together like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much value in bringing together like a bunch of authors for something like what you just described, like a Woodstock or a Lollapalooza. Um, like EK mentioned, um, there are so many different areas of horror, so many different facets, so many different authors. It really is probably in a bookstore's best interest to bring out like a sampling of the local flavor, the local authors that they have, to be in conversation with one another, like a panel, like what we did. Um, I know I was talking to Paul Tremblay recently, and he was saying how like it used to be the big thing was like reading, like you would go and do like a reading of your book. And now it's shifted now to like the reading really isn't that important. Like in fact, a lot of authors don't even like to read. Like I
Nobody
personally
wants to do
hate,
the readings.
yeah,
Mm.
I hate doing readings because I'm just like not
So do I.
I'm just not good at it. Like I'm not a skilled performer. So I'm much better like in conversation, I feel like with another author. But even that, I feel like that's becoming a bit stale. Um, Not that I don't enjoy like going to see two authors discussing their work, but I feel like there is something really attractive about a group of authors speaking about the genre together. And maybe you're a fan of one author that brings out somebody who doesn't really know the other three or four whatever authors, and then you have like a full audience when it would have been maybe like a couple of people instead for just like one specific author. So I feel like there
Yeah.
is a lot of value in um, bringing out a bunch of different authors for a single event. I don't know how sustainable that is, especially with schedules and budgets for publishers. But I think like this event, this little tour we did was really fun. And I think actually there were some bookstores that I talked to like while we were doing the tour that were saying that they were looking into doing a group of romance authors
Yeah.
for something similar, like, kind of the same thing of like a Woodstock situation with all the different romance authors that they could
Yeah.
scrounge up.
That's like the Warped Tour. That's the
Yeah.
like. No, but it is amazing. Like, I mean, I'm just like looking at us right now, and it's like Dennis's book, EK's book, your book, my book. They are all very different. They're very singular in the respect of like what what they embody and like what story they're telling. And like I feel as if it's a great kind of grouping because it's not like, oh, there's two vampire books on that panel, or like, like
Mm-mm.
we and I do believe that like we each had a kind of like a readership that someone would definitely come out for just Dennis, and like they would be exposed to EK, and then like vice versa. And I feel like that it's really kind of I find great value to it. And also it has to be kind of like emphasized that it was totally like because of a few booksellers, hatching this brainchild. And if it were not for Ryan at Gibson's and Concord, like, and then like her convincing Bill, and then convincing the folks at Print in Portland, and then the folks at Northshire, that like, you know, it it does feel like this is led by a group of passionate booksellers who like horror. And so my question to you all, opening it up to the panel, is this idea of like, what is it like to actually, I mean, be in the trenches and like be with booksellers and talk to readers, and like the kind of actual experience of meeting people in Concord versus meeting people in Portland versus meeting people in Massachusetts. Like, if they all felt very kind of special and kind of singular in their own way, right?
Want me to go?
And yeah, go for it.
Okay. I briefly did a podcast. It was mostly during the pandemic, and it was kind of like weird fiction. I'm going to land the ship in a second, but it was the first time in a really long time, say since I was blogging in the early O's, where I felt like I had finally had direct connection to an audience. Like I was hearing from people, not a huge audience, but it was a real warm, intimate connection that reminded me why I made things, because a lot of my previous books did not have events like this. And I wasn't meeting people that had read my work, and I didn't feel the impact and I didn't feel the exchange. I didn't know who I was writing for in a way. And that podcast really opened things up for me. And this experience has been that times a million, because I met all of you for starters. And that's just such an amazing thing for me. It's lonely in Troy, New York. There are a couple other horror writers who I only met 6 months ago. But it's just a remarkable human connection at a time when everything seems like it's too much through the screen, and it's really easy to hide, especially in a winter like this where you just stay in maybe more often than you want. As I've noticed, my writing has changed in the last month because I can picture faces that I might actually be writing for now. And it's people that I've met on this trip. Like the imaginary ideal reader has now actually been in front of me. And I don't know, that's priceless. That is an incredible experience as a writer.
It's beautiful. EK, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think like, you kind of write all alone in your little room and then you release a book and you have your publisher and there's kind of like a flurry of excitement if you're lucky around the release. And then maybe it goes a little quiet. And so it's really easy to just be like, oh, if I'm not getting tagged in like 5,000 Instagrams a day or seeing like that I have like a billion Goodreads reviews, like that just means that my work is kind of like disappearing. And so having this come out, this tour happen while I'm still in hardcover mode, but a while after my book was actually released was so special for me because I was able to like really see how there are people who have been connecting with my work this whole time and they're out there. and I think the booksellers in particular, I mean, I'm a total book nerd, of course, like we all are. And so it's really overwhelmingly special to me to walk into a bookstore and see my book like front facing with a little card, a shelf talker, or to like meet some of these booksellers and just realize like, oh, you read my work and you really connected with it. And like you didn't just this is not I'm not just here because I was available and I lived in Maine. Like that's just super special. And especially these like indie bookstores are just like such like they're like the lifeblood of publishing and of just like book communities in general. So it's been really cool to see that as like a vibrant part of these communities and these bookstores that were really able to pull out a crowd for us in the middle of some of the worst weather we've had in years.
Oh my God. I mean, it was really dicey there. Like when we were at an Unlikely Story in Massachusetts, like you could feel like like the audience was like,
Yeah.
we gotta go home because we're gonna about to get dumped on.
Sign
Um,
faster.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
just quick addition to that, Eric in particular, like, there was that one reader in Gibson's who was so strongly connected to that one story you wrote. I mean, like that was one of those moments to witness it actually happening was so amazing. I think
Yeah.
he said, did he say it was his favorite, literally his favorite story ever? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it was a
ah,
story that well actually is on the final ballot for the Bram Stoker Awards now, which I'm
oh,
really happy about.
congrats.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
So to hear him like mention that he like loved that story so much was so meaningful to me because it's like not the main centerpiece of that collection that he was talking about. Like it's like the third story in and I honestly didn't think that many people read that book. So it was really special to hear him like just be so effusive and really complimentary toward me about that piece. Like I find that the people that really get my like vision, they really get it and they're like on board. And he's definitely one of them. Like he's definitely someone I'll remember for the
Yeah.
rest of my life, you know.
It was a real beautiful moment, and to kind of contextualize it, we were in Concord at Gibson's, and you know, you get you. I feel like one has to acknowledge that like people are traveling greater distances to see authors, like driving an hour, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes three, and
Yeah.
they will cross state lines, and it there was something really kind of magical about that moment where that reader was kind of speaking specifically to you, Eric, and saying, I've come here. Am I correct that like had they even said like they don't even go to book events like this? There was something kind of like this was like a pilgrimage, and
Yeah,
um,
yeah, and they loved the collection, The Skin Was Once Mine, but they loved specifically this one novella in it.
wait,
Um,
was that
All the
was
Parts of You That Won't Easily Burn.
all the parts of you that won't easily burn?
You're
Hey,
killing
hey,
me,
hey, Eric,
Clay.
do you wanna get a haircut? No, I think I'm fine. I just want to keep all the parts of you that won't easily burn. I just want to like have a list of all of your titles so that like I can just plug them in at any given moment. Do you need a bottle of water? No, the trees bled. The grew there after I bled on. No, I'll move on. Okay, well, okay. So this was life changing for us, and I do want to just say thanks again to Ryan at
Mhm.
Gibson's, to Unlikely Story, Bill, to everyone at Northshire, RIP on that event,
Twice. Because we had the potential reschedule that got snowed out the following Sunday.
I know.
and Print, a bookstore in South Portland, Maine. You
Adam,
guys
right? Yeah.
are the best. But the reason why we were on this journey in the first place was because we have these books. We have these books out. And Eric, I will start with you. Um, with At Dark, I become a little lonesome. Um, and I I I feel like what is so wonderful about this book, I mean, and given the fact that we've had a, a lot of time to kind of converse about it, one of the things that really kind of remains singular to me, and that I would love for you to kind of talk to us about, is the kind of origin of the story itself. Not how the deal came about or any of that stuff, but just specifically like where the notion of the ritual. Um,
Mhm.
maybe tell us what the book is about, and then kind of go into the kind of like the history of it, how you discovered it.
Sure, yeah. So, A Dark I Become Loathsome is about a man named Ashley who undergoes a significant amount of loss and trauma in a very short period of time. He loses his wife to cancer, and then shortly, a little after, he loses his son due to what they suspect is a kidnapping. Um, and he is obviously dealing with so much grief, so much guilt over this loss that he's suffering, that he's endured. He tries to come up with this service for other people who are similarly afflicted, who are contemplating suicide as he once was, and still is kind of to some extent. He comes up with this service of a death ritual that hopefully will allow people to who he seeks out like on these like online forums on like the dark web, and he offers his services to them. um, he hopes that this ritual he's created will offer them a new lease on life. Basically, it will be like a reincarnation, a sort of rebirth for them, and they'll have a new perspective on life. And what he does in this ritual is he uh, basically buries them alive for half an hour and allows them to kind of like be inside the coffin, and buries them, lets them like meditate in there, lets them like ponder, think about their life and their reason to keep going on. And obviously, like if they're seeking him out, there must be some small kernel inside them that wants to keep living. And it really the story kind of kicks into high gear once Ashley meets a new candidate for his ritual named Jinx. And Jinx basically just sort of threatens everything that Ashley stands for, makes him question his ritual, his purpose for this ritual, and things kind of spiral out of control from there. And it's a descent into insanity and obsession. And essentially, the kernel for this story really began with me researching and reading a couple articles that were published, I believe, by ID in like a couple years ago about a service that an organization in Asia implemented. They did these sort of like makeshift death burial rituals, very similar to the ones that I've described in my book. And it was a way for people who were suicidal to come to terms with their suffering, their grief, their loss, their longing to live a better life, and really force them to reevaluate their existence and their motivations to kill themselves. And I thought that that was such a really unique, interesting backdrop for this story. And I really began kind of reflecting on what kind of character might engage with this kind of ritual, who would go to them for this service, what kind of person would like execute this service. And that's really where the genesis of At Dark I Become Loathsome came from. It really was more like character based than anything. Like a lot of my previous work has been really focused on plot. And I mean, there's been some character work that I've tried to like weave throughout, but this book felt more like a really intimate character study, and I really wanted this book to be that. I wanted it to be something where you're like stuck inside the mind of this person who's going through this unbearable psychotic break.
Mhm. How long did you hold on to that article, that ID article? Like, what was it a while before it kind of gestated in within you and became this book?
Yeah, I find that I come across things like, nonfiction pieces that I think are really captivating, and I'm like, "Oh, that would be interesting to thread into a book or like a novella, a story, whatever." And I kind of sit on it for a while. In fact, that happened recently with a short story I just completed where I had had this idea for something that I had read about, and I had sat with it for a couple months, maybe almost a year, and then I finally was like, "You know what? I'm gonna start writing this. I'm gonna start working on it." And um, I feel like that gives me the proper amount of time to really consider character and motivation, and what I want the story to be, how I want it to feel. And this At Dark I Become Loathsome was like no exception. I really sat with it for a while before I started writing anything, and I'm a big fan of outlining, so I wrote pretty extensive notes before I started, and um, there were elements that I had to get rid of in like later drafts, and then things that I added. But for the most part, the book is the vision that I intended it to be.
I mean, I'm kind of imagining you have this kitty of articles or I like clippings or like stories that are just kind of in a gestational stasis.
Mhm.
And is it that like you're like, I think this one's ready. Like I'm gonna pull this one out and
Yeah, it takes a while. It takes a while. And then I'm someone that I'm kind of superstitious. Like I really can't start working on a piece until I have a title formed for it. I'm just like really superstitious like that.
yeah.
And this piece was difficult because I didn't really have the title locked in for this until I was a few chapters deep. And I was just ruminating one day and thinking different mantras that Ashley would be like repeating uh, during his day to day, and I can't quite recall how exactly it came to me, but it just kind of crept into my mind eventually, and I was like, that's the title. And once I had that, like I was locked in and really ready to start rocking and rolling on this project.
Yeah. I'm really happy you brought that up because I feel like ritual is so valuable to this book in particular, but I feel like I could say that about almost like the majority of your work, where there is a certain system at play or cycle that characters kind of go through, like a process that is either something of their own making or that they kind of like connect to a ritual, um, and that's how they like most of, you know, on a like character to character level, that's how they kind of engage, like they like the dynamic of ritual seems to be at play in a lot of your work.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught on to that because ritual is like very important to me just in my personal life. Like I'm just someone who's very ritualistic with how I write, how I create. But I'm also very interested in ritual and writing. And I have another novel coming out later this year called We Are Always Tender with Our Dead, which is the first novel of my Burnt Sparrow series.
Mm.
And that novel is very much rooted in ritual as well. It's set in this isolated rural town, fictional town in New Hampshire, and about a massacre that occurs there one day, and kind of how the whole town really reacts to this tragedy and how they set up these rituals to commemorate the people that they lost, but also try to like lick their wounds and move on, but they're not really moving on.
Yeah.
They're like memorializing it in a really weird fetishy sort of way. And that's what that book is about. So I'm really looking forward to that release as well. And I think readers who appreciate the ritual in this book, I think they'll appreciate that one as well.
I have to ask. I've never asked you this. The whole panel, the whole tour, I never asked you. But if you found out that there was an opportunity to get buried, to like to have this, to perform this ritual of spending 30 minutes underground entombed, uh, you know, when I read it, it made me think of like a sensory deprivation tank where you're just kind of
Mhm.
like lost with your thoughts, and like that is, you know, you are at the precipice of life and death, and like what that, how your senses kind of overwhelm you and your thoughts kind of overwhelm you in that. Like would, like did you ever ask yourself like, could I do that or would I do that?
I did. And the answer was pretty much always like, fuck no, I would never do anything like that. Um, I'm someone that I just really love to be like in control, and I don't like to be outside of my comfort zone too much.
Yeah.
So a ritualistic experience like that would be very difficult for me to get on board with. So that being said, my answer is kind of boring, but I don't think I would. But then
All right.
again, if I ever, got to a point where I felt a certain type of way and really was like at the end of a rope, I don't know what I would do. Because I feel like once we're pushed to certain limits, I think anything is possible when we're at like the end of a rope, when we're pushed to the like the utmost extreme that we can handle, and maybe we can't handle it. I feel like that's what a lot of my work is really focusing on now that I think about it, like in full. A lot of my work is about the lengths people go to when they're very vulnerable
Yeah.
and isolated and upset.
Yeah.
That's really what I'm writing about most of the time.
All right, I'll put the shovel back. Thank you, Eric. Um, EK, you were on the show. You were a guest on Fearmongers way back when the book, when Youth Juice first came out. So I've been dying to ask you, now that you're back, has Gwyneth Paltrow sent a cease and desist yet? Like, has there
Oh my
been,
God.
like, have you
Uh,
gotten any blowback from the wellness industry, the beauty
no,
industry?
I haven't. And I feel like, I've been I've almost been pleasantly surprised at how many people in that world who like maybe I used to work with or whatever have really enjoyed the book. I think people just really do kind of connect with the absurdity of that industry, even though, you know, maybe they're not as critical as I am. But but no, nothing from Gwyneth yet. I'll keep you I'll keep you posted.
I mean, what I find really compelling about Youth Juice and kind of when you kind of start talking about satire and like how far does the tongue plant itself into the cheek? And I do think that Youth Juice, I mean, you correct me if you feel otherwise, but like I would say at first glance, Youth Juice is a satire, that it has a kind of like a jaundiced eye that kind of looks at this industry and isn't afraid to kind of sh like show the kind of like the maybe the uglier side, the like seedy underbelly of it. And maybe it's the I'm thinking like Dorian Gray of it all, like, what may be underneath the skin. Um, so did when and I'm going to repeat this because it's something that you mentioned in the last Fearmongers, but like you worked within on a kind of journalistic side, like kind of covering the beauty industry and kind of the wellness industry. So when word got out that you were writing this satire, this horror on the wellness industry, were friends not returning your calls, or was there ever a moment of like, don't you can't write about that. Don't write about me.
I think so. I started working on this in the pandemic, like deep, not leaving my house times. And at that time, I was already kind of extracting myself to a degree from kind of writing about beauty stuff. And I guess I didn't really realize I was doing it at the time because I was a freelancer. So I think it might have been a little harder if I was like full time, still doing it full time, to be like, oh, I'm releasing this book. It's like, I do think it was useful that I kind of worked in more of the coverage as opposed to like literally working at a beauty brand. But I do think that there is sort of a healthy skepticism among like beauty journalists that I think have even emerged even further since I started working on this book. Um, where people who like still cover the industry and are still like entrenched are, I think becoming more outspoken about how damaging it can really be, and hypocritical in a lot of ways to sort of use this language of self-care and feminism and really be just trying to sell you stuff that is gonna freeze your face in time. So I really didn't get a lot of pushback on it. And I think it's partially because of the climate. I think the climate that it was released in, really, it's like this was becoming like a conversation. And there's like, there's a newsletter, a really popular newsletter by I believe the writer's Jessica DeFino, and I forget exactly what her newsletter is called. It might be called like the Beauty Review, but it's like all about the absurdity of the beauty industry and also kind of calling out the journalism side for not investigating the industry as much as it should, because there is a lot of kind of like, we'll send you a giant box of really expensive moisturizer and you may feel like a little pressured to only write glowing reviews instead of being really honest about these products or these brands. And so I feel like the timing was very good for that, for people to get what I was doing.
Okay. That's really interesting because I feel like, what a year it has been for the release of this book. Um, I want you to start by kind of like giving, for the uninitiated, kind of the kind of elevator pitch of what Youth Juice is about. But then like looking at it from this kind of global view of like we're now in the era of The Substance being nominated for Academy Awards. And like, I think like, you know, there is this kind of desire to have this conversation, and you know, you are a part of it. This book is a part of it, and I think that that's really exciting. So what's the book about, and what is it like to be a part of this conversation that's happening?
Yeah, so Youth Juice is about it's a satire and a body horror novel about the beauty industry. And it's about a woman named Sophia who's about to turn 30. She's really stressed about it. She feels like very aimless in her life. She hasn't really found her passion, and she sort of like inexplicably gets hired as like a copywriter. They call her a storyteller at this very trendy beauty brand based in Soho, New York City, called Hebe, which is the name of the Greek goddess of youth. And the founder is this woman named Tree Whitestone. She's like, you know, the icy blonde, picture perfect, statuesque girl boss, and she kind of like takes a real like shine to Sophia, and pretty early on at her time there gives her this prototype or you know whatever sample of a moisturizer to test out, and she kind of partially chooses Sophia for this project because she wears gloves all the time to hide her like really kind of gnarly scars from biting her nails and picking her cuticles. So she's kind of she senses this like desire in Sophia, and she's like, all right, you try this like magical anti-aging sort of healing moisturizer. Sophia figures out really quickly that totally heals her hands, and it works too well. So that's sort of the elevator pitch. And yeah, it's been an interesting, I think I remember about like a year or so before the book came out, I was a little anxious that I had kind of missed the boat actually, because I would say the first few beauty sort of novels that I like, beauty horror adjacent novels that I really saw coming out were coming out in like 2022, 2023. So there was like Rouge by Mona Awad, Natural Beauty is another one. And I was like, and even my own publisher, a different imprint, released Aesthetica by Ali Rowbottom, which is like not really horror, but kind of has like a speculative element. So even when I was submitting this novel to them, I was like, this book, they're not gonna want this because it's like they already have kind of like a beauty influencer book on their list. But I mean, I've read all three of those novels, and I think they're all contributing to the conversation in really distinct ways. And I feel like we're finding new ways to have this conversation. And so the substance coming out a few months after my book was released was kind of a wild experience. I was like, I similarly to those other books, I felt like I was pleasantly surprised at how different it was from Youth Juice. Like I didn't really feel like I was like retreading ground that had already been covered necessarily. I
Mhm.
felt like all these works were kind of distinctly critiquing anti-aging culture, like youth worship, the beauty industry from kind of these different angles. And I just think it's been really a great moment for me to have a book about the beauty industry, because I'm constantly getting tagged in books like The Substance on Instagram. Literally happened a few hours ago. So I feel very lucky to have kind of hit that zeitgeist
Yeah.
timing very well, since that you cannot control that. You know, when I started
Yeah.
working on this book, I had no idea that it was going to be coming out in the midst of this pop culture moment.
Yeah. It it does it feel like a conversation then? Like, do you feel like it like your book is kind of in conversation with these other films, these other novels, that like there is a kind of larger point that's being made kind of collectively?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think, you know, I'm sort of I'm like limited by my perspective as like a young white woman who like worked in this industry, but I think there are so many other aspects that I can't necessarily speak to from personal experience that are important to explore, that I think other people are really exploring very in very genius ways. And so I feel like all of these like perspectives are really coming together to kind of talk about this in a way that's, I mean, it's just beauty. The beauty industry and beauty horror and body horror are like, they're like the same. I don't know. It's
Chocolate
I
and
only,
peanut butter. Yeah. I mean, it was amazing to be on the road and hear audience members talk about their kind of visceral reaction to I'm not gonna, these are not spoilers, but like there are scenes in your book about like the peeling of, or the eating of, or chewing of, and not, and like, and it's just, it, I mean, I remember reading these scenes and the reaction that I had, but then to hear somebody else kind of talk about their reaction to it, and then me feeling it based on their kind of like, it's this like weird kind of game of telephone where like it's just, you remember where you were when you read those sections in Youth Juice. And yeah, I love it. I do want to ask one last question about, I mean, it is, and it kind of goes back to satire, but like I think of American Psycho, and how we had this one kind of conversation about the kind of like the daughters of Patrick Bateman, and how like there's Mayfly, there's Black Sheep, I think there's the eyes are the best part, like there, even like recently there was Victorian Psycho, um but like when the novel American Psycho was released, and there was this massive kind of outroar, but then there was the film of American Psycho, and it was a, in essence kind of a dark comedy that kind of recontextualized the novel, and it kind of reevaluated the novel. I I'm curious if you feel as if, with Youth Juice in particular, that the kind of notion of satire and how comedy, however barbed, however sharp, wherever, whatever the target is, like, does do you find yourself kind of writing with this kind of eye towards satire, or towards kind of like enhancing, or kind of like wetting the kind of blade of horror with comedy?
Definitely. I think also like satire feels like my natural mode. And I feel like the book started there for me. Like the horror came a little bit later. And so, but I think that that is something that, I mean, I wonder sometimes if like readers struggle more with like the combination of the very disgusting scenes in my book and the sort of like satirical element. I'm sure, I mean, like Eric said, it's like the people who get it really get it. So like they're always there. But I did once see a comment that was like, this book was, it was actually a positive comment. They were like, this book was so absurd that I like didn't know what was happening for a while. And I was kind of like, that's an interesting take, because like in some ways I feel like it's just how my brain works, and like I just
Yep.
don't know that I have any other way, because to me it's so absurd, and the absurdity is kind of where the horror lies a little bit. Like you're
Yeah.
like, it's in the book, there's so much happening that's horrible, and these characters are so droll, and like, they
Yeah.
just are so deadpan about everything that's going on. And that's, to me, that's hilarious, but it's also kind of like what working in like a corporate environment is like. And that is, I think, what I was really trying to get at. Like, this is what it's like to be sitting in like a corporate meeting and having them address like, I don't know, some sort of, there's like a police investigation going on throughout the book, and it's intersecting with the beauty brand, and the founder, is
Yeah.
like, of course we don't support the police state, but we will be cooperating with the investigation. And it's just like, that's what these companies are like. And so it
Nothing like
felt
what
very
we're
true to me.
dealing with now. Thank you, EK. Dennis, god damn you. I feel like you jinxed the whole tour. And I know I've said this before, but I'm just gonna say it one last time, because like I feel like you wrote a novel that cursed us in this way where, like, if it were not for our winter monster and it were not for you being a part of this tour, it would have probably been a balmy 50 degrees. This would have been the mildest winter known to man. And I genuinely, well, I maybe partially feel like you are responsible for every inch of snow that we've gotten, um, because of your goddamn book.
I've unfortunately captured the February zeitgeist. It's not as fortuitous as Aaron's situation. Yeah. I will tennis ball that back at you, however, sir, with
No.
your book.
No, we don't have enough time. No,
I know.
no,
I would
know.
just like to point out
You're,
that there are certain elements of the current moment that could perhaps be blamed upon your novel.
I'm blaming you for the weather. Don't blame me for our current cultural, political climate. Damn you.
We both need to write nicer horror novels next time. Something warm and harmonious.
But come on, Our Winter Monster is amazing because it is, I mean, everybody's like, oh, I want to read a beach read, or I want to read a like a wintry read. Like what? Like I think you've written kind of a quintessential winter read now. Like there is something so kind of like imbued to the season that, like, every Christmas, every time there's like a little, like, bookend of like winter books, like I think yours is gonna be right there, kind of like prominently placed. Um, so I have to, I mean, can you give us the kind of log line synopsis elevator pitch of,
Sure.
what
And
Our Winter Monster is?
I'll try to be quick because I think we are running a little out of time. But
Oh no, this
okay.
will exist for perpetuity. We're here to the long run.
They'll still be succinct. There's a couple named Holly and Brian who suffered a trauma together a year ago in winter, and they've not been the same since. They look at themselves differently, they see each other differently, and that has shifted the dynamic of their relationship in a way that is cracking them in half. So at the end of this year, they go on a getaway vacation to a remote ski town in an imaginary town in New York to try to rekindle the relationship, find some reason to keep going, figure out if they're going to be able to make it work. And they get caught in a blizzard on the way. So they're in a place that they don't know, and they spin out off the road and lose each other in the storm. And their cell phones aren't really working, or don't seem to be. So they're speaking a lot through left voicemail messages as they're trying to figuratively and literally find each other in this blizzard. And they discover that their emotional problems seem to be manifesting an actual primal snow creature that's trying to kill them and is wreaking havoc on this town. So the third major character is the town sheriff, Sheriff Kendra, who is playing catch up through quite a bit of the book, thinking, what the hell is happening in dear old Pine Buck? And why is this person dead? And why is this house destroyed? And what happened to that car? And who is this couple?
Yeah. Brutally murdered. Brutal. Like, no one is just dead in this book. Like, they are eviscerated. Which, it's one of the things that I find so kind of compelling about you kind of talking specifically about, like, the kind of origins of this book. Like, you you had some very earnest intentions, right? Like, you set out to write a monster book, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wanted it to be fun, first and foremost. I am a great believer in entertaining the reader. I think a lot of the great, even very serious, quote unquote, novels have that propulsive readability, and it's not to be scoffed at.
Yeah. But what I would counter then that you have done is integrate something which is kind of far more complex and kind of like like you've gone beyond the kind of like the monster yarn, the kind of abominable snowman yarn, and created something that, I've kind of teased you about it, but I do feel as if this is like the kind of ultimate relationship therapy horror novel. Like, there's something to be said about, a couple that is literally kind of separated, that need to kind of like both literally and figuratively reconnect before the monster that their relationship has kind of manifested, the trauma within their relationship has manifested, tears them apart even further. or the people around them. So you know, kudos to you for like wanting Godzilla in the snow, but you did something else. And when did like how did you do like how did I was going to say how did you sabotage yourself? Like how did you take this kind of earnest intention of like I want to write this, but then it becomes something far more kind of enriched.
The more I got to know the characters, the more they started to tell me who they were. I wasn't clear when I began writing it. So as I got to know them more and I got to care about them more, I think it was my desire to care about those people as people. I tend not to write characters that are representative of anything. So like even a couple in my book is not supposed to represent couplehood. It's same as like the sheriff in this book is a Black woman, and that wasn't some kind of diversity choice in a negative sense. She came to me that way, and I don't know why. And I just wanted to know more about her. A lot of my characters feel like it's someone I've just glimpsed on the street and they've caught my eye and I need to know what their deal is. And then you get to know them and you realize all of those initial conceptions about them are wrong or way more interesting, or something is not what you think it is, and it tends to be the reason that you either detest or really fall in love with that person. And I do like people in general, so I tend to like all of my characters somehow, including a couple of characters in this book that aren't particularly likable, but I find something funny or sympathetic or if only pathetic about them. I feel bad that they're going through a struggle, and I can relate in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that, you know, with the kind of dynamic of the couple at the core, at the heart of the story, there is, you know, you are kind of discovering by, you know, the further in you go, the kind of the nature of the beast that has found them or that they have kind of created. And I feel like, you know, trauma plays into this story in such a way where it's like I think I've gotten familiar with the notion of like, oh, here's a single character, a solitary character who has to deal with their trauma, and we see them kind of like, you know, through the course of the novel, like they're like there's a redemption arc. But here you have two people who are navigating uh, the kind of the a singular incident that they are both in kind of embroiled in, and I guess I'm just curious, like, you know, given the fact that it's the two of them, like there's like a duality to it, and like that feels fresh to me. That feels like a very kind of novel way of like looking at relationships and like trying to kind of like how do we keep the spark alive and how do we not get ripped apart?
It is interesting. I was saying how I don't think of them as a couple, quote unquote, as a thing, and yet they are. Like their couplehood in this case is a character and has this. A lot of longtime couples or very intense couples have that,
Yeah.
where there is a sort of thirdness. There is a blend that happens. The blue and the yellow become green, and now let's look at green.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting to me about Brian and Holly is that you get a pretty good look at them before that initial trauma, and they're the opposite of what they are now. So one of them is very confident and very dominant and becomes the very scared, submissive, unconfident person. And the opposite happens. So like you get to see each of them at their strongest and then each of them at their weakest. And unfortunately, they're neither at the same time. And
Yeah.
so one of them always feels less, and the other one always feels like a bully or feels like they're outrunning their partner. And I think a lot of people in relationships have had those experiences where someone grows or someone slips backward, and it's hard to hold that line and hold the relationship together.
Yeah.
So the book becomes this kind of metaphor. I suppose the fear and anxiety at that moment, or the self-hatred that emerges, there's the monster. And
Yeah.
that's something very relatable. So when I'm trying to write just a monster novel, monsters just aren't inherently that interesting. They're interesting in the way we respond to them
Yeah.
and what they might mean for the people involved.
So what comes first for you then? Is it the monster or is it the characters?
In that case, it all kind of came at once. Like I remember wanting to write winter. Sorry. I do actually remember really wanting to write a wintry book. I just kind of had a vibe and a mood. And very quickly I realized I needed to somehow pull that into something I could see or feel. So I do think the monster and the couple kind of snapped together very quickly as a little triangle. The sheriff came last.
I mean, it's amazing that you know, if the sheriff came last, like I love her. She is such a like it, you know, it is kind of great that you mention her because like, you know, she is such a kind of counterbalance to you know, the you know, whatever navigation the couple is going through, like when you get to the sheriff, like in a weird way, and you mentioned this, so I feel like there's like a kind of like horror rendition of Fargo here,
Mm.
where, you know, in Fargo you have they're not a couple per se, but you have like Steve Buscemi and who is it, Peter Stormare. Like, you know, like the hitmen are kind of having their kind of like they're navigating their character dynamics, and then over here you have the sheriff who's kind of like closing in on them, like kind of like you see the kind of like roads converging, and when they do, in your book you have instead of a wood chipper a snow blender.
Mhm.
And um you know, I know you have a love for the Coen brothers, so I'm curious if you can kind of tell us about the kind of sensibilities of their work that feeds into your own.
Yeah, they have a certain type. I suppose Kendra is a kind of type that I write often, which is someone who's kind of has their shit together more than some of the other characters in the book, and is a bit of that center line, someone that maybe the reader feeling a little calmer can relate to,
Mhm.
but also has their own problems. And I would think the character in Fargo, that sheriff, she doesn't have too many complications. She's got the pretty good marriage to Norm at home. There's not a lot of inner conflict for her. What's the name of the character? She meets the guy, Mike. She
Oh
has that
yeah.
one strange
Is
scene
she
where
gonna
the
is she or is
guy
she
hits on
not
her.
gonna like, yeah.
Right. That's the closest we get to she is making choices. I've compared Kendra a little more often to the Tommy Lee Jones character in No Country for Old Men, because he has a bit more inner conflict, and I think he's struggling a little harder with what he's coming across the whole way through.
Yeah. Well, your characters have a lot more body parts to kind of deal with, so I feel like I think it balances out, you
Yeah.
know. I I can't thank you all enough for, you know, the tour is over, but I feel like like for me, I wanted to just kind of put a button on it and have like, you know, beyond the kind of pictures that we took along the way and the stories we can share, like just having a moment to say like, this was something that we did. This was something that was put together by some amazing booksellers at some amazing bookstores that we should all support and purchase books from. Maybe our books, I don't know, because they all have signed copies now at stock at Unlikely Story, Print, and Gibson's. But you should still go to Northshire Books anyway.
Hmm.
But yeah, I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank all of the bookstores and booksellers. Guys, Dennis Mahoney, author of Our Winter Monster, E.K. Sathue, author of Youth Juice, Eric LaRocca, author of At Dark, I Become Loathsome. Guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. This has been Fearmongers.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Clay.
Clay.
Thank you.
Have a lovely night, guys. Thanks for tuning
Bye,
in.
gang.
Stay warm out
Bye.
there.